I published a book called Global Career.
I just finished this book called Global Career, How to Work Anywhere and Travel Forever. And it's an absolutely awesome book, super unique.
In 2018, launched that, had built a few other things, like a few other offers around it. In 2019, I acquired my first kind of small software business, and that started doing pretty well, and was able to get my investment back in under 8 months.
You've been to so many different places, and you've been able to interact with so many different people from so many different cultures. Connect with anybody, any culture. That's something that is, relatively universal.
You built this business about helping other people really take their careers in a totally different direction.
Seeing all these businesses doing well and being like, okay, this is a great industry, it's a great investment, but hey, why not double down on something that we're preaching, we're marketing about this industry, walk the walk, right? So it was cool to kind of acquire a software business.
Why did you go to acquire the SaaS business? Why SaaS businesses first? And then what was it about this specific business?
I got Mike Swig with me here. Our long reunion has at last come again, my old friend. But welcome to the podcast. For everyone that doesn't know your esteemed legacy, my friend, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so great to be on here, Greg. And yeah, it's been long overdue, man. I think the first Empire Flippers podcast we were on together was back in 2016 when we were just sitting in Saigon, passing a microphone around, kind of like impromptu. So yeah, it's been really good to kind of reconnect. And there's been a lot that's happened, I think, for both of us in that time. So I guess the 30-second overview is that I'm an author and entrepreneur. I've built a small portfolio of software businesses and have helped other people kind of as an acquisition advisor. So a pretty interesting kind of segue into the space, I guess, is there's a lot of first-time buyers and first-time sellers who just need a little bit more hand-holding. And so I've kind of found a little bit of a niche within the niche, so to speak. But overall, staying busy bootstrapping my own businesses and then also acquiring and building my own portfolio.
Man, that brings back memory lanes, that podcast. I totally forgot about that. So for the audience out there listening, if you didn't catch that, Swig and I used to work together at Empire Flippers. We were both employees number 4 and 5, and we could argue who's 4, who's 5, because we literally got hired at the same time. We shared rooms basically for months when we first began.
And it's like two twins arguing who was born first.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm a Gemini zodiac sign, so we're just the two bodies, same soul, my friend. So same person, right? Twins.
Love it.
But yeah, man, that brings me back. That's almost 8 years ago when I left the oil field. And I think you were in New Zealand before, right? You were doing the whole travel startup, right?
Yeah, so I'd worked at a kind of a small tech startup there. They ran out of money and I traveled for 2 months. I spent a month hitchhiking the South Island in New Zealand and essentially started running out of money, and then saw the advertisement and job opening for Empire Flippers and basically applied and then flew out to Vietnam to kind of get things started.
Yeah, so Swig and I worked together for years at EF before you finally left. So before we get into what I really want to talk to you about today, which is this amazing acquisition you made not too long ago, why don't you give us a little bit of the details of your transition from, working here at Empire Flippers to going out on your own business? And if you don't mind, please sing praise about our spaghetti article on your travel website. That is your number one article for sure.
Yeah, fast food spaghetti in the Philippines. So if you go to the Philippines, you got to try out the fast food spaghetti challenge, which is going to McDonald's, Jollibee, Wendy's, and a few of the other places and trying the infamous fast food spaghetti. But yeah, as far as kind of a brief overview of what happened, like Greg mentioned, started in 2016 at Empire Flippers, and honestly just loved things there, but always had a passion for kind of doing my own stuff. I'd built a travel blog before and was really into travel writing and photography and stuff. And in 2018, I published a book called Global Career, How to Work Anywhere and Travel Forever, which essentially was a practical guide on how you can travel and still kind of work remotely, grow your career, and still have a fairly decent income. And so in 2018, launched that, had built a few other things, like a few other offers around it. In 2019, I acquired my first kind of small software business, and that started doing pretty well, and, was able to get my investment back in under 8 months. So it was like really, I guess, meta, working at Empire Flippers, seeing all these businesses doing well and being like, okay, you're kind of playing into it. Like, this is a great industry. It's a great investment, but hey, like, why not double down on something that we're preaching? We're marketing about this industry. Why can't, I do that and also, walk the walk, right? So it was cool to kind of acquire a software business, get my investment back in 8 months. It's been a very passive, great investment. And so that just kind of opened the can of worms, like, okay, why don't I just keep doing this, but on a larger scale? And that's kind of where it brought me, is after exiting Empire Flippers in 2020, building up my own offers, but also like stacking some money to have a future kind of acquisition. And that kind of brings us to like the SaaS acquisition I had.
Yeah. I love that you did that on the side, because that's something I always wanted other people to do at EF. Like, that was back when we were allowed to do it, right? Before the side project policy, though now we're allowed to do it again. So like everything's full circle. but yeah, like, I think that's great, because a lot of people, they view acquisitions and like, oh my God, it's like this massive thing, but you started off like very, very small, right? So like, you can start small and build up through this like big complex beast down the road, but you don't have to start at the complexity, right? So,
right.
Yeah, I think that's a cool journey. But yeah, let's fast forward to your acquisition, because I think this is probably, I would imagine, probably one of your best acquisitions you've done, considering what happened. So talk to me a bit about, like, why did you go to acquire the SaaS business? Like, why SaaS businesses first? And then what was it about this specific business that you bought? Maybe give us, before you answer that question, maybe give us just like a brief detail of the actual deal itself, so it gives context to the audience.
Yeah, so this business was listed for about $500,000 on Empire Flippers. And the reason that I love this space, like, I think between $500K to $750K is like this weird sort of like no man's land. It's too big for solopreneurs, and it's like too small for any like the big portfolio buyers. So it really is kind of this sweet spot that kind of can offer a buyer a little bit of strategic leverage to negotiate a good deal. And this deal in particular it had been on the marketplace for a while. It was a bit complex. I think a lot of buyers had kind of overlooked it because it was based in the Netherlands. It was a unique software, almost like a big portion of the traffic and customers were like outside of the US. And so it kind of was a complicated thing. And the reason I was looking at deals is I have an acquisition program where I help first-time buyers. So one of my buyers had actually performed the due diligence. I had done weeks of due diligence on this deal. They passed on it just because it didn't fit their buyers' criteria, their other investors. It just wasn't really the structure they wanted. But I had really dug deep into this business, and I kind of had a strategic partner who was structured in Europe, could really like help with that side of things. And so we just had this like really good synergy between, hey, this acquisition looks great. I think the seller is willing to like negotiate a bit. They were just been working on the business for 10 years and were kind of ready to be done with it. So it was just one of those things where it was the right deal, but it was the right deal for the right people, right? Where we just had a little bit of good, I don't know, synergy between the two of our skill sets to make the deal happen. And as far as like why I love software, I think, again, it has the biggest moat out of any business model. So you look at any of the other business models with FBA, e-commerce, dropshipping, content sites, again, people can kind of replicate that a lot faster and for a lot cheaper. With software, this person had been building this business for 10 years. The type of software that it's built on usually ranges between $80 to $100 per hour for a good developer. So for us to try to build this software from scratch, if we're going at a very fast pace with a big team, would have likely cost about the same or more than what we acquired it for. And on top of that, there's a lot of other things where the SEO rankings are around. There's not a lot of other competitors in the niche. So there was all these other kind of like moats. It was like a moat around a moat around a moat that I really loved about this type of software business. And I think in general, software businesses tend to have bigger moats because of that, because it is quite expensive to replicate a software and then also to get the marketing strategy kind of replicated. So I think that answers the questions, but happy to go a little bit more extensive.
No, that's perfect, man. I mostly agree with that, though. I think AI is changing a bit of the moat equation on SaaS front, but I think that's still mostly true, right? That's the thing people never think about, right? Like, oh, why would someone buy this business when they can just go build it themselves? Like, well, yeah, but you're also not taking in the fact that this business already has customers and it already has marketing that's actually working. We're going to dive a little bit into some of the business stuff because the changes you did to the business, I think, are really fascinating, which will highlight why this was, in a lot of ways, such a good opportunity. But you mentioned how this was in the Netherlands. So it was all written in, not English. The entire website wasn't English. So talk to me a bit about that. Because we recently started selling. So that site must have come about right when we allowed foreign sites onto the marketplace. Because before, as you know, if it wasn't in English, we just want to do the deal. But I remember getting hit up by people at conferences all the time. I think Niels was the one who finally broke the camel's back, where he's like, please let me sell my non-English sites with you guys. So I finally convinced Justin and Joe to let us do it, right? So it must have been around that time. But talk to me, how did you get over that language barrier? Why was that not a detractor for you like it is for so many other buyers?
Yeah. So again, I think a few things there. Having the majority of buyers were Dutch, the site was in English, but big portion of the buyer pool was in the Netherlands or foreign. There was a good portion, let's say 15 to 20% that were in the US, but that's the things that we loved about this business is the more we dug, the more layers we unraveled was oh my God, there's so many opportunities because the person who built the business, a very talented developer, really passionate about this niche, but he was a developer and wasn't a marketer and didn't really see kind of all the flaws in the process. So that's where a lot of, the opportunities came in where it's okay, oh, it's only Netherlands, it's a foreigner. Well, what are the opportunities to expand globally or into the US, right? So we kind of saw that as more of an opportunity than, there's not many US customers. Okay, well, let's figure out a way to get more of the US customers there. So that's been a huge thing is I think our lens was just a little bit different than other buyers on this type of deal. And that's kind of, I think, why we were able to structure it. I think talking about the deal structure is also kind of creative. At least that's part of the thing that I love is we were able to structure an earnout, about $90,000 earnout. And we essentially got the business for $225 upfront, $90,000 earnout, but we tied the earnout with certain stipulations. And the reason we did this is because it's a fairly complicated software tool. The person had spent 10 years building it, right? So only him. And we're we want you to agree to at least 5 to 10 different changes that you'll kind of implement over the next 2 to 3 months. So that was a creative deal structure because it was a win-win for him. He was walking away with a great price and was ready to just kind of, move on, exit the business, walk away with a good chunk. And essentially, he decided to walk away from the earnout, which is fairly rare, considering it was about a couple months of work. The reason that he decided to do this because he just had a kid, just started his new family. He really just, after 10 years, I think it becomes fairly emotional where people just, they want a clean exit and they don't want to even spend. Yeah. So he had walked away from the earnout. I think partially it was that. And then after he had agreed to some of the stipulations, I think he realized that it was a little bit out of his comfort zone because we were completely transitioning over to Stripe, which he didn't have much experience with Stripe development. So in the end, month one, this business netted over 100K with the earnout being canceled with the profit of the business. So it was huge thing. It's just imagine your whole mortgage got canceled or a big portion of it, 30%. So it was a huge win for us. But as we were having this, we're like, hey, did you talk to your partner? Did you sleep on this? Did you like, we didn't want him to like make an impulse decision here. So yeah, it was kind of wild for us when we were going through it, but we're like, hey, take a few days, talk to everyone who's involved on your side, make sure that this is the direction. And they came back, signed the addendum to the APA, and we were able to move forward. So in general, yeah, it worked out great. But I think those creative deal structures can work out well. It was kind of a win-win scenario. So we got all the changes we wanted to get done, or we got the 90K, right?
That's amazing, man. Talk to me a little bit. I want to talk about actually, let's go there right now. So the money you did pay, a little over 200K that you mentioned, was that like all personal war chest with you and your partner, or did you finance some of that deal? Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's just pretty easy split, 2 people, 50% in. So makes it an easy 50-50 partnership, which outside of that, it can get a little complicated.
Yes, that's why I was curious. And on your partnership, when you brought your friend into the deal, like how did you guys decide what the priorities would be, like how this partnership will play out? Because that's a big thing a lot of people don't really consider when they get into bed with each other a bit, right?
Yeah, we just kind of looked at like what are our core strengths and like some of the stuff that we would do together and some of the stuff that he would do on his own. So he has a lot of more experience with SEO. He has like a ton of, I guess, levers he can pull from that industry. Having his own agency, we can get certain things at cost or for very cheap.
Yeah.
So that was kind of his realm. More like my realm was a little bit more handling dev, handling a little bit more of like the CRO initial changes. And so, yeah, it was kind of like maybe at some point it's like a 70-30% operator, but then it, pivots back when we're doing new projects. So now it's kind of like, what are 1 or 2 big things we want to focus on each quarter? And we kind of divide them up, like what's going to be the best way for us to do this. So as of now, yeah, after all the initial dev change, it's kind of been a fairly passive thing where we have a few contractors and developers working for us, but it's all basically per hour where we don't have these huge, high, like recurring costs.